Okay, so this is going to be quite a change in tone. um, this talk is really, really grim. I apologize for this. Malnutrition is not a nice subject, and I'm going for the 19th century because I am a human remains conservator. I predominantly work with 19th century remains, so I'm coming at this from the point of view of how it presents on the body. And I work in a museum of worst case scenarios, so so let's first of all, content warnings. This is about malnutrition. I am going to be talking about food. I'm going to be talking about diet. I'm going to be talking a little bit about nutrition. I'm even, and I really apologize for this, going to get some biochemistry in there. I'm sorry. There is going to be one image where I'm going to show some skeletal human remains. So, just to be aware of that. But malnutrition, it technically means bad nutrition. So that can be overeating as well as undereating. It can be eating the wrong things. I'm predominantly going to be talking about not getting enough of things today. I'm also going to go a little bit away from the subject and talk about things that you shouldn't eat. But the title of this talk, Please, I Want Some More, comes from Oliver Twist. So that's where I want to start off today, Oliver Twist. And he is this image of an underfed child. So if we go to the beginning of the book, it tells us that Oliver should be farmed, that he should go to a workhouse and somebody will look after him for 7 pence halfpenny per small head per week. Oh, my slides are not changing. 7 pence halfpenny, we're told, is enough to get a good round diet for a child. It's enough to overload the stomach and make it uncomfortable. However, this is not what Oliver is getting. The elderly female was a woman of wisdom and experience. She knew what was good for children, and she had a very accurate perception of what was good for herself. So she appropriated the greater part of the weekly stipend for her own use. And that means that the child has to live on the very smallest portion of the weakest part of food. It either sickens, it went cold. In 8.5 cases out of 10, it's going to, it's going to end up dying from not getting enough. And the background that I've used for this, for these slides is an image which shows Margaret Waters and her sister Sarah Ellis. Everything that I've said sounds very, very dramatic. It was actually happening. Margaret Waters was a baby farmer 30 years after Oliver Twist was written. Her and her sister, they were widows in Brixton, and they were taking in children. They advertised for children that they would adopt and foster out. They advertised for people who would buy the children because they couldn't have children of their own. They pocket the difference. But Margaret soon realizes that it's a lot easier just to dispose of the children after they've been put into her care. So what she does is she gives them opium, which will keep them quiet because you don't want hungry children crying and whining all the time. That also suppresses the appetite, which means that she just gives them teeny tiny amounts of food and they die of wasting, convulsions, diarrhea. And Margaret Waters was actually hanged for this in 1870. So this is something that is part of society, is going on. Baby farming was known about. Oliver Twist, he's one of the 1.5 cases out of 10 who survives the baby farmer, and he ends up in the workhouse. And this is the Cleveland Street workhouse. Dickens actually lived on the same street as this for a number of years. So this is possibly the inspiration for the workhouse in Oliver Twist. They're not getting a good diet here. We're told that Oliver goes there as a pale, thin child. He's diminutive in stature and decidedly small in circumference. So this is showing you one of the things that happens when you get not enough food as you're growing up. Short in stature, the technical term for this is stunted. And we've already heard about Margaret Waters killing children through them wasting. This is the small circumference. So these are actually terms that are used for forms of malnutrition. When you go to the workhouse, this is likely to be the kind of things you get. I've given a thing from Abingdon Workhouse showing the diets for men and women. Children would usually get about 2/3 of what adults were getting. But looking at a variety of workhouses, there's a common thread. Breakfast, oatmeal, made with some form of milk, possibly just water. Dinner, meat, potatoes, dumplings, veg when it's in season. Supper, bread and tea. Maybe if you were lucky, you would get a little bit of bread or cheese. There's not very much of it. You're likely to be lacking in some things, and it's just not very varied. Imagine if this was it day after day after day after day after day after day. And at the same time, this is a workhouse. You are doing work. Oakum picking, which was boring and unpleasant, just pulling ropes apart. Sometimes breaking rocks, so these are physical things. Crushing bones. And this would be to make fertilizer. And one of the things about the diet in the workhouse was that it was so meager that there was a report in one newspaper in 1865 about people fighting over the bones they were crushing, just trying to get the bones so they could suck the marrow out, supplement their diet. And alongside all of this, you get small beer. Now, beer is actually quite nutritious, really. But small beer is usually either watered down beer or beer that's been made from the leftover mash from making the proper beer. So it's considerably weaker. It's only usually about 1%. But the breakfast, the oatmeal made with milk, this takes us on to one of the things that everyone thinks about when they think about Oliver Twist, gruel. And gruel has actually got quite a lot of nutrients in it. You've got carbs, you've got fats, you've got fiber, you've got protein. You've also got all these vitamins and minerals. So there's quite a lot of stuff in there. If it's made with milk, milk is actually really, really nutritious. So that would be adding to it. So you'd be getting quite a lot of the nutrients you need. You just wouldn't be getting it in sufficient quantity. And I just want to look now at, I'm throwing these words around, the kind of things you see on the back of, food packets, just about what they actually mean. So these are the things that you have. What are they? Protein, building blocks. Protein makes up your muscles. It's considerably more complicated than that. Proteins are doing an awful lot of things in your body apart from just being muscle. They're also hormones, they're enzymes. Your DNA, unique to you, unless you're an identical twin, is actually a code for making proteins. That is what it does. So proteins are doing everything that makes you, you. And proteins are strings of amino acids. There's 20 or so of them. And effectively what you have is, you eat the protein, you break it down into the individual amino acids, and then your cells take them all and they arrange them according to what your DNA is telling them to make. And this is one of the things, as someone who's been vegetarian since the 90s, you get a lot of people telling you that vegetarians and vegans can't get enough protein. I have been told that so many times. And it's just not true. Plant DNA is making proteins as well. Plants have a lot of proteins. The thing that's different is that when you have, a steak, you're ingesting those amino acids in roughly the correct quantities you need to make your own proteins. If you're having plant proteins, they tend to have different ratios of amino acids. And so you need to have a more varied diet to make sure you're getting enough. Because one of the things that happens is that if your cell is building up those proteins from your DNA code, they go along, go, we've got this one, we've got this one. Oh, we don't have that one. And they don't substitute or anything like that. They just stop. So, if you're not getting all the amino acids you need, then that means that your body just stops making those proteins for you. Carbohydrates, energy. It's as simple as that. And when I was an undergraduate, I spent a lot of time learning all the chemical pathways that you turn sugars into energy. That hasn't stuck in my mind. Fats. Fats fats are doing a lot of things. Fats get a bad rap, but they're how we store energy. They're also acting as padding, like for your organs. They're shock absorbers. You also need them for fat-soluble vitamins, and they're also involved in things like your mood, your inflammation response, the way your cells communicate. So really, really important that you're getting the correct fats into your body. Fiber. Fiber is carbohydrates as well, but it's carbohydrates you can't absorb. I've euphemistically called this movement. Fiber is important for going to the toilet. Why have I put this on pictures of donuts? Effectively, this is because we are donuts. It's not because donuts have a lot of fiber, but effectively, you've got to think of yourself as like, from your gut, from your mouth down to your anus is the whole of a donut. It's kind of outside the body. It doesn't open directly into the body itself. So anything that you're putting into your gut has to cross membranes to get into it. And what that fiber is doing is making sure that you're channeling things down from your mouth through your gut to your anus and it passes correctly. If you don't get enough, you get constipated. And Samuel Beckett tells us that constipation is a benefit if you're a Pomeranian. It's not if you're a human. And the way they would deal with that in the 19th century is something like this: a clister or an enema syringe. I am not going to explain how it is used. I'm sure you can figure out where that nozzle goes without me telling you. And this was something that was very, very, very common in the 19th century. Here we've got a satirical cartoon where a monkey is showing that he's using the superior type of clister. I also like this. This is for an advertisement for a product called Jubal, which was a French laxative. And we can see here the man looking very proud of this Jubal. He gets to turn his back on those physicians with their enema syringes there. And another advert for Jubal where you see them cleaning out the intestine. Multivitamins, these are probably the most complicated things. Vitamins and minerals, what are they doing in the body? You probably hear about them a lot. Do you know what they're actually for? Vitamins are cofactors for enzyme activity. What does that mean? Well, you've got reactions that are going on in your body. Vitamins are helping them happen. And that means that without the vitamins, they either slow down or stop entirely. And they only actually realized what vitamins were at the beginning of the 20th century. They were doing experiments trying to get farm animals to have, the correct diet, to see how you can make farming more efficient, basically. And they were being raised on artificial diets, which they thought they had everything. They had the carbohydrates, they had the protein, they had the fiber, they had the fats. But the animals were still not thriving. And this was what led them to this discovery about these other things. That they always knew there was stuff that you needed in the diet. They just didn't know what it was. And initially, they thought they were amines, the same thing as makes those amino acids I've been talking about. And so these were called vital amines, vitamins. You can see what they were doing there. The trouble is that it turned out that most of them aren't actually amines. Now, as I said, they'd known for a while that they realized that certain foods had effects. For example, in ancient Egypt, they realized that you could give people who had night blindness liver, and that helped. It was only at the beginning of the 20th century, however, that they realized what was going on. So this was the first vitamin to be discovered was vitamin A. You can see why they've called it A. It was the first one. It was discovered in 1913. And vitamin A is needed in embryo development and immune response. And the other thing it does is it produces a protein which is in the retina, which is how we absorb light at low levels. And if, as I was as a child, you were told that carrots make you see in the dark, this is almost true. Carrots, the thing that makes them orange is a substance called beta-carotene. And when you've got beta-carotene in your body, you can convert that into vitamin A. So it does help with your night vision. So that's vitamins. Minerals, these are chemical elements that are essential to body function. So a list there are others, but these are the ones that we predominantly think of. And I just want to look now at a couple of diseases which happen when you are short of some of these things. For example, scurvy. Now, scurvy is a lack of vitamin C. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. This may be the point where it all goes horribly wrong. I'm going to show you this. This is a skull. It's a sheep skull. And vitamin C is involved in making a substance called collagen. And collagen is involved a lot in the body. So it's in your skin, it's in connective tissue surrounding muscles and membranes and organs. It's also in bones. So bone like this is made of two things. 70% of it is something called hydroxyapatite. And that's made of calcium and phosphorus, so those essential minerals we were just talking about. The other 30% is collagen. And what collagen does is it takes this very hard material and it gives it takes away the brittleness of it. So if you have a lack of collagen in your bones become very, very, very brittle. So let's see if we can go back to the screen. Share. That worked. That's amazing. Hallelujah. Now, vitamin C, scurvy had been described for a long time, but really when long boat voyages became common, it starts to become really noticed. And you can see here, this is an illustration for the rime of the ancient mariner. And the earliest symptoms of scurvy are a very, very, very intense lethargy. So intense that people actually thought that laziness was a cause of the disease. It's debilitating. So you can see here in this illustration, people just lying around because they just don't have the energy. The body feels weak, the joints are sore, legs and arms would swell up, the skin bruises at the slightest touch. It also has a role in nerve transmission, so you would get these powerful obsessive fantasies. And again, in the rime of the ancient mariner, we think this is what some of these things are. They see water snakes. These are the delusions that you're getting from the scurvy. The disease progresses, the gums become spongy, teeth begin to fall out, breath becomes fetid. You get internal bleeding that will cause blotches on your skin. Untreated, it will kill you. And this is likely to be because of sudden hemorrhages near the heart or the brain. And during the 18th century, scurvy killed more British sailors than any of the actual fighting that went on. So we can see here, this is a description of it. We can see how awful it is. You couldn't eat, and we hear that people were dying of it every day. The bodies being thrown into the sea. And then this man comes along, James Lind. And he was a surgeon. He was a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, who I work for. And he ended up working on a ship as a ship's doctor. And he conducts what was actually the first proper clinical trial where, there are controls and you're making observations. You're not just making it all up as you go along. And the results of all his experiments were that oranges and lemons were the most effectual remedies for this distemper at sea. And he actually starts to say that sailors should have some of this every day to stop them getting scurvy. And as I say, James Lind gets a lot of credit for this. He wasn't the first person to observe this. People had been figuring that out before. The information just wasn't being as widely disseminated as his book was. He also got quite a few things wrong. He thought it was a cure, but he didn't realize that the lack of it was actually the cause. He also tried to make a little sort of concentrate, basically like a orange juice cordial, by boiling the lemon and orange juice to reduce it down to something that was easier to transport. The problem is that boiling would actually destroy the vitamin C, which was making it useful. And it was only in the 1900s where they realized what vitamin C actually was and what it did. And after James Lind, people were still not getting it right. One doctor said that people should have fizzy drinks to activate the digestive system. And his prescription was something which was called an elixir of vitriol. Now, vitriol is sulfuric acid, and he said that it should be taken with spirits and barley water and laced with spices. The barley water may be helping, the sulfuric acid certainly wouldn't be. It still carries on though, even when they're realizing this. This is actually somebody who was local to Edinburgh, a woman who was living alone. And she had a history of deliberately avoiding fruit and vegetables because they gave her an upset tummy. So she didn't eat them. And so she'd been having these awful bruises on her legs with ulceration. She noticed her teeth were becoming loose. She was having frequent nosebleeds, and she went to hospital. They gave her orange juice. They said she should have the juice of 6 oranges every day, and she recovered, apart from some residual discoloration of the skin. So that's the lack of vitamin C. You may have heard of rickets. Rickets is a disease which is known as osteomalacia when it occurs in adults, and that's a lack of vitamin D. And you get vitamin D in fatty fish and eggs. You also get it from the action of sunlight on the skin. And again, back to Dickens, some people think that this is actually what was wrong with Tiny Tim, why he needed the crutches and the leg braces. Though I prefer this depiction of Tiny Tim. And what vitamin D is used for is absorbing calcium. So I've already said about bones being made from calcium and phosphorus, the hard part. So if you have a lack of either of those elements in your diet, the bones will become soft. The thing is that you can have enough calcium in your diet, but if you don't have the vitamin D, you can't do anything with it. So your bones will become very, very soft. And this is something that was endemic in Edinburgh at the beginning of the 19th century. So this is a skeleton that we have at Surgeons Hall of a woman who died at the beginning of the 19th century who suffered very, very badly from rickets. And you can kind of see why rickets would be so common at this time. This was a time when, Scotland is still cold. We don't get a lot of sunlight. And at the beginning of the 19th century, Edinburgh was known as Old Reekie. There was a bit of a problem with air pollution. So all that smog, all that particulate matter in the air, it's stopping the sunlight being able to get to Earth. So people aren't getting it on their skin. Plus it's cold, they're wrapped up. There's also a wee bit of a class problem going on here. So at the beginning of the 19th century, most of the rich folk in Edinburgh were moving to the Georgian New Town with its grand boulevards, whereas the poor people were left in the Old Town, where there are all those narrow closes. The sun just can't penetrate that far down. So as I say, rickets was very, very common, but this lady was very, very extreme. You can see that her ankles are bent so they're almost touching her knees. And we've got a description of her. We know that she was a little woman with rather a good face and a great deal of impudence, which is a wonderful thought. And she would stand at the infirmary gates and talk to the students. And because of her legs having no motion because they were twisted together because of rickets, this meant that she went about with on crutches all the time. She goes on with great velocity. And you might see up here, like the tops of her arms look kind of funny. The bones look sort of bent. And you might think this is down to the rickets, but this is actually down to the fact that she's using crutches all the time. Your muscles have an effect on your bones. And so her bones have become have changed shape because her arm muscles must have been so developed in order to be able to move about on these crutches all the time. And of course, I've said about class, this was often thought of a disease of poverty because people weren't getting things like the eggs they need. And of course, in A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge becomes benevolent after seeing all those ghosts. The Cratchit family get more money, and it's implied that this is curing Tiny Tim of whatever it is he is suffering from. People do have theories it may be things other than rickets, but you know, if it was a few eggs, that could have gone a long way to helping him. So those are some diseases of malnutrition. And I said I was going to talk about things that you shouldn't eat. So this is a bottle which says poison on it. I'm not going to talk to you about deliberate poisoning today because, you know, we don't have time. Other people have to speak this afternoon. But I do want to talk a bit about accidental poisoning. So in the first half of the 19th century, if you went to a pharmacy, you would buy things in bottles that were known as blanks. You know, these were sold en masse. They looked pretty much the same, and you would just have a label put on telling you what was inside. The issue was there was a lot of illiteracy. There was also no electric lighting. People were using candles, they were using oil lamps, and that means that, you know, you might not see properly when you were reaching into a cupboard to get something out, so it would be very easy to pick up the wrong bottle. And this happened a lot. So we have one story in the museum of a woman, she was in her 30s, it was New Year, and she had some caustic soda instead of some sugar, just from picking up the wrong bottle. And that means that this burnt her throat. And that led to her throat becoming so constricted that she couldn't eat. This, you know, was obviously a thing that was fatal. And this was just a small accident from picking up the wrong bottle. In 1863, there was a bill to prevent accidental poisoning in the UK. It did not pass Parliament, which does seem slightly mad. But a lot of pharmacists would take this up as you know, as a personal thing. You know, they would do it voluntarily. So you started to get poisons like that initial bottle I showed you being put into these ribbed glasses. This was something that New Development glass manufacturer made possible. They would sometimes be embossed with the word poison. And this meant that even if you couldn't read, if you were reaching into a cupboard, you knew which ones were the things that you did not want to be putting onto your cereal in the morning. People would often swallow things accidentally. And in our museum, we have so many things that have had to be pulled out by various instruments because people have accidentally swallowed them in one way or another. You know, this is an X-ray showing a coin that's ended up in the wrong place. But these are accidental. Sometimes people would do it deliberately. And this is a condition which is known as pica, where people start to eat things which don't have any nutritional value. And there has been a lot of psychology gone into the reasoning behind pica. I think today most people seem to think it is something that's caused by obsessive compulsive disorder, but of course, you know, ideas about these things change. But we do have some examples of this. This is a trichobezoar. Bezoar is a foreign body that forms in the stomach. Tricho is referring to the fact that it's made of hair. And this is something that people do. You can see it a lot. People chew on their own hair sometimes. And if you do that obsessively, hair is non-digestible. It goes into the stomach. And there's been so much hair here that's formed a cast, which is pretty much the shape of the stomach. And of course, if you've got that much hair in your stomach, the food is not going to be able to go through. So this is something that would require surgery in order for it not to be fatal. These kind of hairballs, these trichobezoars, they have been observed to be far more common in women than in men. And again, there's a lot of psychology gone into why this might be. I have a feeling that one of the reasons may simply be that, you know, through the 19th and a good part of the 20th century, it was far more common for women to have long hair than men, which makes it easier to chew on. The thing is, though, that not all of the hair balls we have are from human hair. This trichobezoar is from a woman's stomach, but it's made of horsehair. And this is somebody who was pregnant, and while she was pregnant, she would compulsively pull some of the hair stuffing from her mattress and eat it. And so this is how this one formed. So things that you shouldn't be eating. Possibly one of the more extreme examples of this is going to be my final example. This is a very, very, very heavy jar of metal. Like when you lift it up, you cannot imagine carrying all of this around in your stomach. But this is what one man did in Leith. Now, Leith is where I live. This is where I'm sitting right now. You see some of the people in the pubs here, and you can understand that they might not do things properly. This guy was eating these bits of metal, not because of some sort of disorder like pica. He was doing it to raise money. This would be a sort of a thing that he did in the pub. He would say, I bet you I can eat this, and if I do, you'll give me money or buy me a drink. This is not something I would recommend doing. And that is the point where I'm going to finish. This is me. If you want to get in touch and ask me a question, find out more, hear more horrible stories about things that go wrong with the body, and I'll stop sharing my screen and take any questions you may have about all of that very, very cheerful stuff.